Under the blackened towers of Harrenhal, the gods would smelled of wet earth and leaf mold, iron in the water and a sweetness that came with spring. The willows on the lakeshore trailed their fingers in the green water, and a single pale weirwood leaned crooked as an old man with a hand of white branches splayed above the pool. A slight man in drab green stood hunched at its base, shoulders bunching beneath a patched cloak, while 3 broad-shouldered squires ringed him in. They were raw and laughing, all teeth and elbows, with the rough assurance of boys who knew exactly whose livery they wore and whose favor would shelter them after. The smallest man had his hands up, palms open. He said as little as a tree. Robert Baratheon watched them from the shade, a heavy-shouldered lordling with the black hair of his blood and a mouth made to grin. He had come on a whim to stretch his legs among the trees before the lists resumed, a flagon of watered wine in one hand and a little tremor of restlessness under his ribs, the way he always felt when there were too many lords and not enough swords swung. He would have gone on watching at first, had not the thump of a blow and a sharp intake of breath cut through the birdsong. One of the squires had driven his shoulder into the small man's belly and sent him to a knee. The other 2 were crowding close, the way dogs crowd a trapped badger. The little man's face was sharp and brown and still. Reed, Robert thought, from the neck by the look. The boys jostled, laughing, until the leaves parted and Lyanna Stark came through like a storm wind. She was all in a boy's riding leathers, dark hair spilling, gray eyes bright with anger that made her lovelier than any court polish could. She had a tawny blade of smooth wood in one hand and her chin was set. "That's enough," she said. One of the boys snorted and half turned, and the flat of Lyanna's wooden sword cracked across his knuckles. He yelped, and the next stroke took his legs from under him. The second boy lunged and took her shoulder, but she twisted and the wooden blade lifted him up and over to the mud. The last stepped in with fists. He was quickest, Robert noted with satisfaction, and she stamped his instep and jabbed him twice in the belly and once under the ear with the butt. By the time the first was up again, she had the point at his throat. "You shame your house," she said, breath fast, eyes steady. "You shame knighthood. You think yourself strong to gang upon a man for the cut of his cloak? I say you're cowards." "Easy," Robert said, and stepped out of the trees before the boys could find their courage again. His flagon sloshed. "The lady has the right of it. You 3 off with you. Go wash in the lake and pray the gods you never have to face her with steel." Their insolence shriveled at the sound of a great lord's voice, and at the sight of the antlered black of his doublet. They stammered and fled, hands to bruises. Robert watched them go, amused, then turned to Lyanna and the little man. "You're bleeding," he said to the man whose lip had split. "What's your name?" "Howland Reed," the man said quietly, as if he'd promised himself he would not explain. Yet here he was explaining to a lord. "Of Greywater Watch, my lord." Robert said, giving him his hand because he was in the mood to be generous and because the lady was watching him, and because the man had stood his ground without whining. "Of Storm's End. You're far from your swamps, Reed." "Not so far as I might be," Reed said, bowing slightly. Lyanna had lowered the wooden sword and now tapped Robert with the point as if to prod a sleepy hound. "You came late to the fight," she said. "I came at the right moment," Robert said. "Else you'd have had to cure them as well as beat them. I've heard much of wolf's blood. I see it's all true." She cocked her head. There was a hint of a smile at the corner of her mouth and something in him lurched. Not lust, not yet, but a recognition like the sudden knowing that the antlered stag you've been tracking has been following you all along. "I came to ride," she said, "and to see knights as they ought to be, not this puffery of silk and trumpets. You'll not see a true thing in the lists till the men take off their plumes." "You'll see it," Robert said, thinking of the crack of lances and the moment before impact when a man's heart rises to his teeth and he becomes entirely himself. "If you watch me ride." "I've seen you ride," she said dryly. "You fall as handsomely as any cock in a yard." Howland Reed's eyes flickered from one to the other. Robert laughed, shoved at his own shoulder where the bruise was knitting from the last tilt, and said, "Then watch again." He sobered enough to look at the little man. "You have friends here, Reed. If any squire is fool enough to forget it, name me. I will remember, Reed said. Lyanna slid the wooden blade through her belt and came to stand too close in the easy northern way that would have unsettled a court-bred girl. If you mean to name yourself her friend, she said, jerking her chin toward Reed, then you should mind his enemies, and mine. The world is not kind to small men and women with tempers. I have a temper too, Robert said. Perhaps there is a remedy in that. She gave him one last measuring look and then she laughed, the sound bright as sunlight through the leaves. We shall see if you can keep it bridled, she said. Come, Holland. The next bout is beginning. If we are to be scandalous, let us at least be on time. They left him in the shade with his flagon and the humming trees, and Robert found that the restlessness under his ribs had turned from a buzzing gnat into something with antlers. He rode that afternoon like a man who wanted to be seen. He rode for his own joy too. He could not help it, but he listened for the sound of a laugh that came once through the din and felt the lift of it like the gust that carries a bird. When he fell hard and rolled to his feet grinning, and when he rose again he rose to cheers. He looked for Lyanna in the stands and saw a dark head bent toward a brown-faced man, and beside them a prince with silver hair and a solemn harp slung across his back. The prince sang that night. There was no escaping the song. It drew them like a tide before the great fire, in the yard where banners hung still and the melted towers loomed black against stars. The music was a clear thing, each note a drop of water falling into a still pool, and it split the camp like a blade. Men stared into the flames and wept, and Robert did not weep because he would not, but he felt his throat close and a rawness in him like a boy who had run too far. The song was a story of a woman waiting by a cold river until her hair turned white, and a warrior who never came. Lyanna was very still, the way the north goes still before a storm, and Robert had a dark childish need to seize the harp and break it over his knee and scatter the notes like kindling. He did not. He drank and laughed and made a rude joke that made men around him bark and look relieved to be released from solemnity. He saw the prince again only in the tilt yard, a bright shape in black and red that lowered a lance with the grace of a dancer. It was a rare thing for Robert to admire a man who looked more like a poem than a sword, but the way Rhaegar rode was not soft. He had a steel under his silence. In the final, the prince broke Lord Dane's lance and unhorsed him clean, and men roared for it. Then Rhaegar rose, digested the acclaim without a change of face, and crossed the yard with the crown of winter roses. The petals were pale blue as frost. He passed by his wife, the Princess of Dorne, whose eyes were watchful and tired, and climbed until he stood before Lyanna Stark. A hush fell. It had the substance of cloth, a felted silence, warmed by many breaths. Robert's chest was tight. There was a moment when anything might have happened. The prince lifted the crown of flowers and set it upon Lyanna's dark hair. "Queen of love and beauty," said someone near Robert, faintly, as if they were praying. Lyanna's mouth was a line. She had not asked for this. Men turned their heads to look at her, to look at Elia Martell sitting straight-backed with her hands folded, to look at Lord Stark and his sons, to look at Robert. The points of their attention pricked at his skin. Robert rose. His legs felt curiously steady. He walked the long line of lords with a smile that came easily, because smiling had always been easy to him, and because if he scowled the smile would be an effort later. He stopped before the prince. "You honor the North," Robert said in a voice that carried, and his smile had the edge of a blade under velvet. "And in honoring the North you honor my betrothed. We Baratheons are not jealous men. We are not so small as to begrudge a prince his pageant. Storm's End is rich in roses too." He turned, searching, and saw a page with a wreath of yellow blooms that someone had plucked in hope of a lord's glance. He took it from the boy with an easy nod and lifted it high. "And so I lay my own crown where it belongs." He set it gently amidst the winter roses, a ring of gold among blue. Lyanna's eyes met his, gray water, fierce and uncertain, then, for a flash, relief. "In token of my oath to her and her house," Robert said louder. "In token that her honor is mine to keep from whisper and injury, as mine is hers. Let all men hear it." I will brook no slur upon the Princess of Dorne, nor any lady sitting here, nor upon Lyanna Stark. If any man has a word to say, let him say it to me." That last rose up out of him, and he could not stop it. It was a challenge, yes, but a challenge to the world, not to Rhaegar. He made it deliberately so. The prince's eyes were unreadable. Then Rhaegar inclined his head a fraction. The smallest admission that Robert had not behaved the oath. The hush broke like a net cut from underneath, and conversation crashed down. And Elia Martell looked at Robert with a gratitude so fleeting that later he would wonder if he'd imagined it. After, he found Lyanna in the stables, because of course she would be where the horses breathed and stamped, and the light was summer warm through the slats. She had the crown in the crook of one arm and was stroking the neck of a gray mare with the other hand, the small nervous movements of someone soothing a beast to soothe herself. "You were wise," she said without preamble. "I am always wise," Robert lied cheerfully. "It is my chief fault." She snorted. "Had you made a scene," she said, "you would have made me a thing in the middle of the ring for men to throw their swords at. Instead, you made me a woman with 2 crowns and told them to keep their mouths shut." "Thank you." He was absurdly pleased, in the way a boy is when he sits a horse well, or pulls in a big fish and his father claps him on the back. "I would do more than that for you," Robert said before he could stop himself. He put his hand to her wrist. "I would fight the prince if you asked it. I would fight 1,000 princes." "I do not ask it," she said. "I ask that you not be a fool. My father has sons enough to be fools. He has a daughter to be wise." "Wisdom is a dull thing," Robert said, but he said it softly, because allowance must be made for the truth. "I would like wisdom," she said. "I have had enough of men making legends out of their own tempers. The songs do not sing of the women who have to live afterward." Her hand had not moved from under his. He felt the long bones beneath the skin, quick as a bird's heart, and thought that this was what he wanted. To be the man she counted on, not the man she needed rescue from. The notion was so new he hardly recognized it. He left her then, because he knew enough to leave her when she wanted not to be looked at, and thanked her with a joke that made her smile. He carried that smile like a charm through the remaining days of the tourney. The night of the laughing tree came and went like a dare whispered at midnight. Rumors flowered and died. The prince rode and sang no more. When it was done, the lords broke camp like a flock of starlings, each to their stones and their small councils and their winter stores. In Winterfell, the ravens came and went. Ned Stark rode beside him to the broken tower and spoke quiet truths that Robert never remembered exactly, only the shape of them. That duty was the ground a man stood on, that love was not a flagon that emptied or broke but a hearth to keep. Brandon shouted and made a jest of everything, as quick to rage as to laughter, the sort of man who thought that breaking a thing proved he owned it. Ben-Jen listened more than he spoke and watched the sky. Robert loved them all because they were his future and because they were hers. He stood in the godswood at Winterfell when the air was as clear as glass and promised the old gods in their silent faces that he would do no injury to her that he could help. It was a foolish oath to some. What man does not do injury when he is angry or drunk or victorious? But the old white face had watched 1,000 winters and did not flinch at foolish oaths. He laid his hand upon the wet bark and thought of blue roses with yellow threaded through. He stopped Brandon from riding south when the whispers first came. They came like gnats in summer, whining at ears. That the Prince of Dragonstone had sent a rider north with a letter, that Lyanna had answered, that she had been seen with a dark cloak near the Wolfswood, that a boat had put in by night at White Knife, that she had gone. Ridiculous, Robert said at first. Then not ridiculous. Then rage rose up in him like a dog, and he mastered it only because he remembered the feel of Lyanna's wrist under his hand and the sound of her saying not to be a fool. Brandon raged enough for 5. He flung a saddle on a lathered horse and swore to ride to King's Landing and drag the prince from his palace by his hair. Robert caught the bridle. It was like catching a river. "Listen to me," he said low, not smiling. "If you ride to the Red Keep bellowing, Ares will do what Ares does. He will call it treason and burn you for sport. He will summon your father to answer and burn him too. He will demand Ned and me from Jon Arryn as malcontents and burn us for the smell of it. And there will be a war whether we want it or not." Brandon's jaw worked. "He took my sister," he said in a voice like a rasp. "You do not know that," Robert said. And when Brandon seized his shirt front, Robert let him. Because sometimes men must seize something to keep from drowning. What if she went of her own will to hear him? What if she was taken by men not his? What if this is some knot of court mischief? I will not call my banners for whispers. I will not be the song that ends with 1,000 dead for a woman who would curse my name for spilling blood on her account. He put his big hands over Brandon's and pushed them down. You want to defend her honor? Then you will do as she would ask and be clever. You will hold the north. I will go to King's Landing under safe conduct, and I will ask the king for truth and for justice, and I will look for her. If the prince has stolen her, I will find him. If he has not, I will not give men with torches cause. You will go to Ares? Ned said quietly. Ares will not give you what you ask. Then I will know what I face, Robert said. And if it is war, we will make it because it must be made, and not because my pride is sore. Brandon spat a curse and tore away from them, but he did not ride south. When the first heat of his fury cleared, he fixed his mouth in a line and took his father's seat in the great hall when there was need. Robert went to the Godswood again and laid his hand on the weirwood, and then he rode with a small company south to the Eyrie under the Baron of the Vale's protection. Jon Arryn looked at him long and said, "You learn," in a voice that was half surprise and half relief. "Teach me more," Robert said. "Teach me how to walk through a fire and not be burned." They sent ravens to the Red Keep asking safe conduct and received the king's scratchy hand and the royal seal. Varys the Spider sent a side letter, smooth as oil, offering humble assurances that the court lived to serve the realm and praising Lord Robert's wisdom in seeking answers. Robert would have set the parchment alight if Jon had not plucked it away. "Do not give them the smell of your anger," Jon Arryn said. "They will follow it like hounds." They rode down the King's Road with few banners and many eyes, and passed beneath the Gate of the Gods when the air was hot and salty. King's Landing stank as it always had, of heat and human life, and Robert found that his hands wanted to curl. He uncrouped them. He looked like a lord in velvet with a sword only ornamented enough to please the heralds. He felt like a boulder in a stream he had never liked. The throne room had a metallic chill that did not come from air. The man upon the throne was a scarecrow in gilded rags. His beard had thinned to a fork of iron filings. His eyes were stones. "You come to me," Ares said, and there was laughter somewhere in the rafters. "You come to me to question a prince. You come to me to question me." "I come to put myself beneath your protection," Robert said politely, "and to ask your aid in finding a lady of the north, the daughter of Lord Rickard Stark, my betrothed, gone missing. If there is a prince in this knot, it is through no presumption of mine. I ask only that men cease whispering until the truth is known." Ares's fingers twitched like a spider testing a strand. "She is not here," he said, high and thin. "She is not here. I would have smelt it. Have you smelt it, Lord Varys? Have you smelt a lady from the snows? I smelt a conspiracy today.
I smelt a rat.
I smelt Tywin. Tywin everywhere." He began to laugh. Varys stepped from behind a pillar, the very shape of blandness. "Her Grace the Princess lies abed with her children," he said to the air. "His Grace the Prince is at Dragonstone, reading and praying and studying the histories, as all men know. I have sent birds. I have had the harbor watched. No northern lady has entered the city." Robert almost laughed aloud. Dragonstone, a stone ship in a gray sea. The notion of Lyanna Stark in those soot-black halls seemed as absurd as a summer wreath on a tomb. That instant of relief passed and left only the knowledge that he had no better guess than Varys's lie. "Then I ask leave," Robert said in the same courteous tone, "to send my own men to seek her, and to ask your grace to ask your son to come to court, that he may give the lie to any slander that names him." The king picked at his sleeve. "My son does not come when he is called," he said dreamily. "It is the way of sons. He will come when he is ready." I do not like the smell of your request, Lord Robert. It smells like a candle that has been blown out and leaves smoke. I smell smoke in you. Robert bowed and liked the motion no more than he ever had, but did it well. When I have found my lady, he said, I shall bring her home, and we will trouble your grace no more. Until you raise banners, Ares said quickly. Until you come roaring back like a stag in rut, antlers down. It is what you men do. You say peace and you mean fire. John Arryn's hand brushed Robert's elbow. He recognized the signal to be still and obeyed it. They withdrew, they bowed to princes and smiled at lords. Outside, John said, he wanted to bait you into saying more. You did well. Varys lied, Robert said. He had not known how he'd know but he did. The prince is not at Dragonstone. He is wherever she is, or he is hunting her. We will find him, but we will not start a war by asking about it. John nodded. No. We will borrow men from the marches who know Dornish ways and ride as traders. We will send a quiet raven to the Tower of the Hand, which knows where the prince goes better than the king does, and read what leaks through the chinks. We will speak with Asheridane's maid who misses home and drinks too much wine, and with the kennel boy who hears more than the hand. We will follow couriers. We will be tedious and inexorable. I do not like tedious, Robert said, and then, but I will be inexorable. They found a trail at last, not in the streets but in a song. It was a little thing, a tavern tune not worthy of the prince's harp. A shepherd's girl in the Red Mountains who had seen 3 white cloaks ride by with a banner that showed a flaming tower. In that country towers were few in fire was a warning. John Arryn, who had been young when he learned to be bold, now taught Robert how to be cautious. They went down among the narrow ways and the red rock, through towns that were half earth and houses that had courtyards at their hearts where figs ripened, and they listened. It was Howland Reed who found the door in the mountains where wind sang like a reed. He had come from the north at Robert's letter, as quietly as he had stood in a godswood, and he walked through the scrub like a man at home. Here, he said one dawn when the sky was the color of a sword's back. See the scuffs where hoofs have gone and stones have been set back? Hear the water? There is a spring near. A man builds near water unless he is a fool. The walls will be stone. Will they open them? Robert asked, though in his bones he knew they would not. The Kingsguard had names like old songs. Dane, Went, Hightower. Those men did not open doors because a lord outside asked civilly. They will open them if they choose to, Howland said. They will kill us if they must. But they are men, not the wind. Speak to the men. They climbed beneath a sun that burned pale and away, to a white tower on a violet rock, the stones mortared as tight as clenched teeth. The day was high when they stood before it. There were 3 men outside, and their cloaks were white. Robert recognized Arthur Dane by the way he stood, relaxed and absolutely balanced, as if the pale sword strapped to his back were merely a part of him. Beside him was Oswell Went, heavy and watchful. The third had the wind-burned look of a man who liked a hawk's height, and Robert made him out as Gerald Hightower, the White Bull. Lord Baratheon, Dane said calmly, as if greeting a man in a hall and not at the foot of his own secret. His hair was pale as washed wheat. His eyes held nothing but patience. Lord Reed, Lord Arryn, the world grows small on a mountain. The world is small under a roof, Robert said. He had come with only Howland and one other, a marcher knight in plain leather. John Arryn had waited 2 miles down with the rest, lest they make some twitch that the white swords would misunderstand. He had told Robert to be simple. Robert had laughed at that. I've come to see Lyanna Stark. Hightower's heavy brows twitched. There is no lady here, he said. Robert looked at Dane. Do not make me a liar, he said. I told the king that I would not bring war to his gate. I swore it by the gods of the north. I have held my banners. I have not called. I have not burned. I have come with courtesy and patience to ask you what I have a right to ask. Is she safe? Did she come here freely? Will you bring her to a door where our eyes can see her and our voices can speak? Or will you force me to be the man I would not be? There was a long quiet in which a hawk cried somewhere, and the sun crept. Dane's hand did not move toward the pale blade. His mouth moved as if he had swallowed something thorny. "You speak like a man," he said at last. "We were told to hold our post against all men. We were told this is the place where kings are made or unmade. But I am not a deaf dog that hears only a whistle. Wait here." He turned and made a sound of protest that Dane ignored and went within. Robert let out the breath he had held. Howland Reed stood as if a reed in a current. The wind lifted and dropped their hair. Time stretched. When Dane came back down the worn steps inside the tower, he had another with him, a woman whose hair was darker than night. She was thinner than when Robert had seen her last, her face sharpened, but her eyes were young and fierce. He did not go to her. He kept himself where he was, and she came the last 10 feet and put her palm on his breastbone. "You came," she said. "I told them you would not bring an army." "It was not easy," Robert said, and then he swallowed the jest and said, "Are you safe?" "I am not a prisoner," she said. "I came of my own will, and I will go where I choose. But I did not come here to shame you or the North. I come because there is a child, and there are things men think are bigger than children." Her hand drifted to her belly. It was not yet large, but the shape was there. Robert felt a thing tear in him and reknit. He had known, in the way men always know, in the way the body knows that the storm is turning before the sky changes. He had known and not known. He stared at her. He thought of the prince's song. He thought of her in stables and on gray horses and laughing in the rain. "Is it his?" he asked, and hated the words as they went out. "It is mine," Lyanna said softly. "I will not lie to you and say that it is yours. I have made my choice, Robert. I made it with my heart, and perhaps with my foolishness. He is not here because he is cowardly. He is not here because he thought to spare you and the world. He is at Dragonstone now in truth, speaking with men about his father, and he left me here with Arthur because the world will swallow women if men look away. He will come back. He means to be a better king than the one we have, and he thinks there are prophecies that matter, but I do not care about prophecy. I care about this child and about not being a tale told in alehouses by men who do not even remember my face." Robert stared at Arthur Dane over her shoulder and said, "You should have let me kill him in the yard when he put roses on her head." Dane's mouth curved as if at a private joke, then steadied. "He does not fear your sword," he said. "That is not discourtesy. It is mere truth. He fears what you would make of the world if you and he began to hew at it with steel while a madman still sits in a chair of blades. This he fears. This I fear." Lyanna's hand flickered up, quick and impatient, the way she cut through other men's talk. "No," she said to Dane. "Do not make songs while I am speaking my life. Robert, look at me." He looked. "I will not marry you now," she said. "If my father commands it and you demand it, I will not obey. I will not be the rope hauled in 2 directions. If you love me at all, if you meant any of what you did at Harrenhal, then you will defend me like a man defends a thing that is a person and not a trophy. You will say to the world, 'Lyanna Stark is not a whore.' You will say, 'There was a prince and a lady and a child, and none of it is your business.' You will say, 'There is a mad king on the throne who burns men alive, and that is your business, not this.' You will leave me here until the child is born. Then I will decide where I will go, and you may come and look at me and speak to me and make your case if you like. But you will not call your banners for me, not for me." He had thought he knew what love was. He had thought it was the hot, careless thing in him that wanted to fight and win and be seen. He had thought it was roses and songs and a castle hung with banners that named a woman as his. He stood there on a mountain with the gods looking on and understood that love could be obedience, that it could be a sword held back. He put his hand over hers. The bones under her skin were those of the girl in the stable, the girl in the godswood, the girl who had helped a man because it was right and not because there was song to be had of it. "I will do it," he said. His voice was hoarse. "I will do it not because I am beaten or because I am biddable, but because I say that this is the right thing. I will say it to my pride. I will say it to Brandon. I will say it to the world. They will laugh. I will drink and let them. They will whisper. I will break their noses if they whisper too close." He lifted her hand and kissed the palm, once, swiftly, like a man swears something in secret. "And when you are ready," he said, "I will come and ask nothing of you but that you listen." She closed her eyes, for a moment not the wild wolf girl at all, but a tired woman who had made a choice and was counting its cost. Then she opened them and smiled, fierce and brief. "Good," she said. "Now go. If I see your face again before the child is born, I will hit it." Arthur Dane escorted them back to the sun, and the wind took the edges of them and made them clean. At the last, Dane said, "Storm's End is a long ride. King's Landing is not much shorter. Be careful, Lord Baratheon." Robert nodded. He had liked Dane before, in the way one likes a falcon that is not one's own. Now he liked him better. "Keep her safe," Robert said, and Dane said, "It is what we were for." They descended the mountain. Jon Arryn listened without blinking as Robert told him what he would do. Howland Reed sat cross-legged in the dust and gazed at the horizon as if a river ran there. When Robert had finished, Jon said, "You will be hated for a while. You will be mocked. Tywin Lannister will set your name in his mouth, roll it around like wine, and spit it out. The North will be torn between its daughter and its duty. The realm will be restive. And when the child is born, all the songs will begin again." "I cannot stop songs," Robert said, "but I can stop swords." "You can," Jon said, "and I will help you. I will make papers. I will make witnesses forget. I will tell Lord Rickard Stark what is true and ask him whether he wants a bonfire or a granddaughter. He is not a fool. I will sit with Lisa and tell her to be patient. I will make the world tedious and inexorable." "And if the prince comes back to court?" Robert asked, suddenly tired. "If he comes back with his songs and his prophecies and his white swords and tells men that his father must be unseated? Then we will be ready," Jon Arryn said. "We will use the law against madness, for as long as law will serve. And when law will not serve, we will use the weight of the great houses. And if swords must be drawn in the end, they will be drawn for the right fire." They rode to King's Landing again and stood in the Red Keep like men who had learned to stand very still with Fisher's patience. Rhaegar Targaryen returned as quietly as he had left, and went into the King's Solar and came out again with a mark on his cheek that might have been a scratch from a thorn or might have been a king's long fingers. He did not go to the princess's rooms. He went to the sept and knelt before the mother. He went to the Tower of the Hand and spoke for a long time with Lord Hands, who in those days was not the Lannister. He stood in the throne room before his father and said clearly, with no tremor in his voice, "I will lead the council in your grace's name. I will go to Old Town and speak with the High Septon. I will send for Lord Stark to consult with him about his daughter's welfare. I will send for Lord Martell to console him for the slight he has endured. I will seek the counsel of the realm." "Traitor," Aerys whispered, "I smell it in you. Varys, do you smell it?" But the realm smelled something else too, and it was a steadiness it had long missed. Perhaps Rhaegar thought of prophecy, and of a song of ice and fire that had nothing to do with women and everything to do with winters that never ended. Perhaps he only thought of governance like a man thinks of repairing a leaky roof when the rain is relentless. He began to govern without taking the chair of knives, and the chair whispered to him anyway. Robert went home. He wrote letters with Jon Arryn's clerk's hand, and he stood in the hall at Storm's End when the storms rattled the arrow slits and told his men that there would be no riding south in fury. He broke the wrist of a knight who called Lyanna a name in a wine-soaked aside, and then he paid the man's maester's fee and sent him home with enough coin to keep him from making a play for Lannister pity. He rode his marches. He laughed and hunted and grew quieter. At Winterfell, Lyanna's father read Jon Arryn's glittering careful letters and Ned's plainer ones and wept behind a door and did not show his tears to his sons. He sent nothing back for a long time. Winter fell and was not winter, a northern summer full of wolf song and light that lasted late. When the child came, the mountain tower heard a woman's cry and the soft cell of a wet nurse's cooing, and Arthur Dane put his sword against the wall and leaned for the first time in months. Lyanna named the boy and then unnamed him and then named him again. She held him until her arms shook. Her strength came back slowly. She sent a raven in her neat hand to Winterfell that said only, "I am well. All is well." She sent another to Jon Arryn that said, "You keep better secrets than songs keep notes." She sent none to Robert, and Robert did not ask for one. Ned Stark came at last, with Howland Reed at his side, on a day when cloud shadows lay like islands on the slopes. He put his hands on Lyanna's shoulders and then on the child's head and closed his eyes. They went inside, and the day moved, and Arthur Dayne stood outside with Gerald Hightower and felt the weight of his duty like a familiar arm around his shoulders. He did not hear what was said in the cool of the tower. If he had, he would have heard a woman say, "Promise me," to a brother who had never yet broken a promise. He would have heard a name sealed with the silence of old gods and new. When Ned came out, his eyes were red and his face a stark face again, and he said to Dayne, "I will take him." "You will not take the mother," Hightower said, a statement, not a question. Ned looked back into the dim doorway where Lyanna stood, her hair braided up, the blue crown wilting in a basin on the table. "The mother will come when she chooses," Ned said. "The mother is not a thing to be taken." He lifted the child with awkward gentleness. "My father will grieve, my brother will rage, but my house is not a house that devours its own." Dayne nodded. Men made wars for less kindly reasons. He saw Ned to the steps. "If anyone asks," the White Bull said, heavy as weather, "you will say he is yours." Ned did not blink. "If it keeps him safe," he said, "I will say he is mine until I die." Robert heard of it in the way that men hear of such things. Not from ravens, but from the shape of a brother's face, from the manner of a letter, from the way the north went quieter than snow. He did not break anything. He did not drink more than he should have. He went to the Godswood at Storm's End, an unimpressive little court with a lone oak and no weirwood, the south being what it was, and stood under leaves and said to no one and to everyone, "I will not go look at him, not yet. I am not made strong enough not to want, and I have promised to be stronger than I am." Years turned. Rhaegar Targaryen gathered councils like a man gathers wood for winter. Elia Martell bore her children and kept her dignity, and Doran Martell did not smile with his mouth while he rearranged his spears in a way that meant, "We remember." Tywin Lannister sat at Casterly Rock with a face like a shut door and saw the shape of a world in which he was not the hinge. He wrote polite letters and sent expensive gifts and removed his household from King's Landing as a man might remove his hand from a dog's mouth, and the city did not miss him as much as he thought it would. Aerys too became a shadow seen now and then in high windows. Rhaegar's regency was no regency by name, but it smelled of one. He mended roads. He sent men to the wall and made the watch less hungry. He listened to maesters and septons and, sometimes, to small folk when they stood up at the edge of audiences and spoke their grievances in voices that shook. He spoke often with Benjen Stark, who came to court at his brother's ask and then slipped away north to put on black, because some men hear the call of a place like a mother hears a baby. Robert married Lyanna Stark in the spring of a year when the snows did not go early. They were not married in the south with banners and scented rushes, but in the Godswood at Winterfell, under a face that had seen 100,000 vows and broken most of them. Lord Rickard Stark came on her arm with a face like a cliff. Brandon was there with laughter held tight behind his teeth, and Ned stood beside him and did not smile. The boy with Ned's name. Just Jon in the hall and in the yard, and only Snow said by men unkindly when they thought his ears were not good. Wore a little cloak and scuffed his feet and looked at Robert with an interest so grave that Robert felt it like a hand on his chest. They spoke their words, and Lyanna held her chin high, and Robert saw that she was not marrying him to be rescued any more than she had been stolen to be a trophy. She married him because the world grew larger when they joined the parts they owned, because his laughter soothed rooms that had learned to brace for storms, because her fierceness was a wall that he liked to stand behind when he was tired. He kissed her under the leaves and the crowd cheered and drank and shouted, and later, in a room with a bed, she sat on the edge and looked at him long, and he sat with his hands on his knees like a boy called before a septon. "I will not be easy," she said. I will not cut my hair because your aunt says I should. I will not stop riding because your steward's wife says it shakes a babe loose. I will not nod at fools. I will not laugh at jokes I do not find funny. I will try not to throw cups. I will not either, Robert said. Except the cups. I will throw cups sometimes. But not at you. She smiled and went forward into a life that was not a song, but which made its own music nonetheless. He went south after the wedding to Storm's End because castles do not rule themselves, and because the Stormlands were ladders built into rock that needed tending. He drilled his levies because men need drilling and because he liked the sound of shouting men who trusted him. He met with marcher lords and with a thin man from the Reach whose vineyard touched his border and who had a daughter with a laugh like bells, and he did not sleep with her. It was reported in alehouses that he did. Songs were made of it and fights were had in corners, and the men who carried those songs south found themselves met with a great lord who smiled and smiled until he did not. He and Lyanna had a daughter with dark hair and eyes that cut. She learned to ride before she learned to dance. She took apart a sword with a smith's patient fingers when she was 6. When she was 8, she fell out of an apple tree, and Robert carried her into the hall cradled like a baby and roared at the maester to be gentle, and Lyanna told him he was a fool, and the child bit her lip and did not cry. Jon Snow grew, and if whispers curled around him like winter fog, they did not pierce him. He learned to move like a northern boy and to listen like Howland Reed and to stand like a Stark. He saw Robert when the Lord of Storm's End came and went and felt something in the man like a hearth on a cold night, and the man always brought him a thing that matched the season. A carved stag in spring, a new cloak in autumn, a pair of gloves in winter that fit as if he had measured the boy's hands himself. He would not look too long at Jon, and Jon, who learned the shape of kindness by touch, knew enough not to press his face into the man's coat. Love comes in odd shapes. A boy can learn them. Rhaegar and Robert met sometimes. Not often. At King's Landing over a council table where maps were spread like quilts. At Storm's End when the prince rode the narrow road to the castle under an evening sky that had broken open like the belly of a fish and spilled gold. At Winterfell once when the king-to-be came north to see what ice felt like. They did not speak of Lyanna. They did not speak of the child. They spoke of roads and ships and coin and bread. They spoke of the wall and of rumors that came down it like ravens that had flown too far and lost their way. Dead men that walked, cold that burned like lime, lights in the woods that moved where no flame could move. Robert had never liked tales told in alehouses. He found he liked these less. He found himself looking north when the wind shifted, and thinking that prophecy might be a word men used when they were too frightened to say the word work. Benjen Stark wrote from the wall in a hand that grew steadier with each year of cold. He wrote to Ned and said, "Send more men if you can. If you cannot send men, send wool. If you cannot send wool, send good prayers. If you cannot send those, come yourself with a good sword. There is a sound in the woods like glass singing." Ned sent men and wool and prayers. When he came himself, he found that the old stones had a comfort to them that courtiers' words did not. He found that the boys who came to the wall were not always the boys who could not cut it at home. He found that sometimes men went out in arranging and came back quiet and empty. He found that when he dreamt of blue eyes staring through snow and woke with his hands numb and his heart beating like a drum. When winter sent a white raven from Old Town, the realm took a long breath together. It was not a harsh winter, not at first. There were feasts in halls hung with evergreen. There were fires banked deep and little joys in tight rooms. There were stories. There was the knowledge that men had built stores and ships and granaries because a prince had insisted, and because lords had wanted to show one another how efficiently they could stack flour. There were rumors too, the sort that grew in corners like mold. Storm's End sergeants told Robert about a village in the Rainwood where the dead would not take to their pyres, where they lay stiff and quiet as if listening. The Dornish wine merchants told Lyanna that the Greenblood had been thinner this year for reasons none could name, and that the Rhoynar women had begun to float lamps downstream in day as well as at night. Lord Mormont of Bear Island sent to Ned, not a letter but a skull, a small, fine-boned thing that might have belonged to a child or a woman, with the sockets rimed with salt where the sea had licked them. He said in his note, "The men who found this say they did not find it in the sea. They found it in the forest." There was no body. Rhaegar sent for his council again. They sat until the lamps guttered. They sent for more maps. They asked Benjen Stark to come and lay his hands on the maps, as if a man could feel an answer through parchment. They spoke of obsidian and men whose grandfathers had taught them words to say when the sky went white. Robert went north. He put Lyanna and their child and a company of good men on the road, and he limped the distance because of a knee he had jarred badly falling in a hunt, and because he had grown heavier with comfort and ale and the weight of command. He cursed his knee and cursed his weight and cursed the way the wind cut through his cloak. And then he closed his mouth because the North had a way of making a man feel childish if he whined. At Winterfell, Jon met him in the yard. He had outgrown the carved stag and the gloves. He had grown into a face that made Robert have to look at a tree before he could look back at the boy. He clapped him on the shoulder as hard as a man claps another man. Jon staggered and grinned and then steadied. He wore a sword that Ned had forged for him by Mikken, a simple blade, and he wore it well. Lyanna watched from the gallery, and her mouth trembled once and steadied. She had grown older and more beautiful, like a knife that has been honed correctly instead of worn down. They rode beyond the wall because Benjen asked it and because Robert could not help himself. The world beyond was a hush. The light had a strange flatness to it. They passed a ring of stones where nothing grew and a tree that had had its bark scored by something with long, patient fingers. "Do your songs speak to this?" Robert asked Rhaegar later by the fire in a hut with a roof so low they had to bend their heads. Rhaegar's hair had grown longer and the whites at his temples had asserted themselves the way they do when a man sets his teeth too much. He had picked up a soldier's cut to his words that made them easier to hear and less likely to be repeated. "My songs speak to the past," Rhaegar said. "My songs tried to speak to the future. Perhaps I listened wrongly." Robert poked the fire. "Perhaps there is no song," he said. "Perhaps there is only the thing that needs doing, and men doing it because they have sons." Rhaegar's mouth twisted. "You think little of prophecy," he said. "I think little of any man who wants the world to match his story," Robert said without heat. "Stories are good for nights when the wind is loud. In the morning you feed the hounds and sharpen the knives and go about your work. The dead do not care about the song you thought they would like." The cold outside pressed against the hut like a second wall. Jon sat a little away from the fire, listening, his face in profile, and Robert was struck by the thought that he might become a man whose listening would shape more of the world than other men's shouting. They went out again when the moon was a thin coin. They found what they had not wanted to find. A man, or what had been a man, caught in a thicket that had not wounded him at all. The flesh had a color Robert had never seen on a living thing. Benjen crouched nearest with a torch and said nothing. Ned came up and put a hand on his brother's shoulder. Rhaegar made the sign of the mother without thinking and looked almost embarrassed at his own superstition. "Dragonglass," Benjen said after a time. "Old words say it. I don't know if old words know anything." He lifted the torch. The dead thing's eyes caught the flame and did not flicker. "I believe the old words. I have to believe something that will be of use." They burned the thing and watched until it was ash. They went back to the wall and had the smiths at Castle Black pull down old crates and break open older stories. They sent to Dragonstone for obsidian. They sent to the Dornish marches for men who knew how to move silent. They sent to the Citadel for maesters who were not too proud to admit they had no idea. Rhaegar returned south with the quiet of a man who had been humbled by cold. He issued decrees that sounded dull to the small folk and thrilling to men who liked logistics. He ordered the acquisition and distribution of dragonglass to named points. He sent grain in winter over roads that had not been meant to bear that much weight and had them mended. He ordered a census of the king's wood and the forests of the great houses and decreed a new planting when the spring came. Because too many trees had been felled for ships, he decided he would not now build. He made Tyrell and Lannister and Tully meet in one place and speak to one another about wagons and not about old slights. He held Elijah's hand in public often enough to make Doran smile and the court whisper. He did not smile much himself. Robert smiled as often as he could. He made a point of it. In the deep of winter, he told stories louder than he believed in them and banged the table enough to make men remember that noise can keep some things away. He sent his best men to the wall in turns. He named 2 bastards that winter because he was not the saint he wanted to be and because the winter was long and wine was hot. Lyanna flung a cup once, and it hit him square in the forehead. And in the morning she put a poultice on the swelling with the softest hands he had ever known. They did not speak much that day. They did not need to. Some marriages are built from the top down. Theirs had needed a foundation under the frost. The spring after the white raven left the rookery, the first true cold receded. The realm breathed again. The new plantings put out their first green. The roads looked suddenly easy. Men were stupid enough to think that the danger had been a rumor, that all the fuss had been a prince's attempt to make them take him seriously. Those men were fewer than they might have been, because something in their bones had listened and refused to doubt. Jon rode south with Ned to see Storm's End because a boy should see the sea once before he decides to live and die without it. Robert met him at the gate and called him boy like a punchline, and Jon rolled his eyes like a boy who had outgrown that word. They went to the top of the great drum tower and looked south, where the wind was clean and the horizon a knife. Robert told him about storms that had shaken the whole world and nights when lightning had stitched the sky. "Is it true," Jon asked, "that you fought 3 men in the Dornish marches and killed them all with one swing?" "Of course," Robert said promptly. "Is it true," Jon asked, "that Lyanna Stark once set your beard on fire because you would not get out of bed?" "Of course not," Robert said with dignity. "At most it smoldered." He told the boy what he could tell him and did not tell him the rest. He showed him how to hold a warhammer and how to cut meat so he did not hack it into strings. He took him to the kitchen and made him eat an orange until juice ran down his wrists. He did not look at the boy's eyes when they reflected the sea. "Tell me about the prince," Jon said at the last, when the wind was quiet and the gulls took advantage of the lull to squabble. "He is a good man," Robert said after a moment. "He is better than I am in some ways and worse in others. He thinks too much. If you ever stand in front of a man who thinks too much and he is thinking himself into a corner, you must throw him a rope. The rope is usually food." Jon smiled. "You do not like songs," he said, "but you married a song once." Robert looked at him sharply. Jon met the look. It was like being looked at by the weirwood. He had a stark steadiness and something else softer that did not blur it but warmed it. "I married a woman," Robert said. "Do not let anyone make a song in your hearing that thinks it tells you a truth about a man and a woman. Tells you a truth about the singer. Remember that." Jon nodded. He looked south again. When he spoke, his voice was very gentle. "What should I remember about you?" he asked. "That I can be better when someone expects it," Robert said. "That I am better now than I used to be. That I can still be a fool when I drink. That I throw my head back when I laugh. That I love your mother. That I, too, will do what needs doing when the time comes." "When will the time come?" Jon asked. Robert looked north, though the sea lay south. "It always comes," he said. "It's just that most men do not know what it was until it has gone past. The time came in small ways, and each small way made the large one less likely. The wall never broke in the way that men who love stories would wish. There was no single night when all men drew swords on the parapets and fought a blue tide. There were many nights when Benjen Stark's men burned something that would not lie down, and many days when little boys in Wintertown found a piece of glass in the snow that glittered like night, and a few long weeks when the woodsmen spoke of being watched by eyes they could not find. There were fires and there were hunts. There were men learned to use bows by day and waited by night in pairs. The long cold receded the way a fever does when the body finally shakes it, in shudders and washings of sweat and the need for broth. The first spring after was a mess, runny and foul-smelling, the way a body learns to be alive again. When Daenerys Targaryen was born, it was in warmth, not the cold that turned breath to knives, on an island that had always seemed to exist more in stories than in fact. Riella the Queen smiled once, as if she had remembered something she had meant to say a long time ago and had at last found the right words, and then she was gone. Rhaegar held his sister-daughter for a long time with a face that looked both older and irrelevant to age. He had become king by then in all but a formal placing of a crown. He had done it so slowly and so thoroughly that when the day came for the crown, he wore it like a hat and the chair of knives side, disappointed that it had not drawn more blood in the process. Tywin Lannister sent another letter. He wrote, "The Rock is your strongest friend if you remember your friends." He wrote, "Casterly gold buys men and men buy wars." He wrote, "There is still a slight left unaddressed from Harrenhal. Sometimes men remember longer than women." He sent the letter to the king, but he sent another to Robert and another to Ned, because a man who cannot stand being ignored is a man who will send many letters. Robert did not answer. Ned answered with 5 lines about winter forage and the price of iron. Rhaegar answered with a list of ships and warehouses and the tone of a man who will not be cowed by the voice he grew up fearing. Lyanna sat in the solar at Winterfell with the window open to the damp. She held her daughter in her lap and rubbed at her hair with a towel. Ned sat at the table and sharpened a knife without looking at the blade, the way he did when he was thinking about something else. "Do you ever wish for a world that is simpler?" Lyanna asked. "With fewer letters?" "No," Ned said. "I wish for better letters." "What would a better letter say?" Lyanna asked, amused. "It would say, 'The snows will be late, and in the 2nd month the ice will break on the White Knife and there will be salmon.' It would say, 'The man you do not trust is not to be trusted, but he will not trouble you for 8 years.' It would say, 'Your children will fight in the yard and then will sit together and share an apple with their heads touching.' It would say, 'You have 7 more summers.' It would say, 'There is a boy at the wall whose boots are too thin. Send him yours.'" "That is a good letter," Lyanna said softly. She thought of a better one, and it was this: "The men who call you names will die of their own spites. The child who walks under your heart will not be a banner but a boy. The man who loves you will learn to put down his cup when you raise an eyebrow. The song about you will fade and be replaced by a song about the time a lord fell in a pond." She smiled at the thought, and the girl wriggled, and she kissed her hair and told her to hold still. When the girl was 10, she went to the Eyrie for half a year because Jon Arryn's wife Lisa had not borne him a child and wanted a girl in the hall, and because the Vale air is good for the lungs, and because it is wise for wolves to see other hills. When she came back, she had a way of folding her hands that made Robert laugh and say, "Which aunt taught you to do that?" And she hit him on the knee. When she was 12, she shot a squirrel with a bow in the godswood, and then cried over it, and then plucked it with a grimness that made Lyanna want to laugh, and instead she showed her where not to find the glands that would taste bitter. Jon grew tall. He learned to be invisible. He learned to be kind. He learned to be patient. He learned to look up when he walked and to say good morning to grooms as if they too had heads and hearts. He asked Ned once what his father had been like, and Ned said, "He was a man, and that is enough to say." And Jon nodded and refrained from saying, "It is not enough." He did not press. He learned that not pressing is a kind of love too. When he was 16, he beat Robb Stark in the yard because Robb had been laughing, and afterward they both went in and drank milk and did not speak of it, but the air between them was easier. Catelyn Tully married Brandon Stark and loved him and suffered him. She learned to be a northern lady and found that a good fire could make any hall hospitable. She bore him sons and once a daughter who died after too few days, and her face went still for a long time and then softened again. She carved a quiet, important place in a hall that liked loud. When she saw Jon, she looked at him with the wary kindness of a woman who has learned that the world is large enough to contain many stories without her blessing. She made him honey cakes sometimes because the boy liked them and because it cost her nothing she could not afford. Littlefinger came up once to Winterfell and went away again because there was not enough air to make his plans breathe. He went to the capital and put his fingers in gold, and men began to forget that his hands had ever been small. Varys moved in shadows and held truths in nets he could draw in at whim. He found that some truths wriggled through and some tangled themselves until they died. He wondered sometimes at night if he had been right when he had told himself that the realm was a thing he loved. He found no answer. He built his webs anyway because it is what men like him do when they do not know which way to look. He saw Robert Baratheon in a hall once, laughing, and thought, "Here is a man who made himself smaller for love and larger for duty and does not know which he has become." Rhaegar played the harp less. He permitted himself to sing for Daenerys when she tugged at his sleeve and asked in a voice like doves, He taught Aegon to set pieces upon a Sivas board and to think 3 moves ahead and then to throw the board over when he had thought wrongly and start again without shame. He visited Elia when her joints ached and said, "Forgive me," and Elia said, "For what?" and meant it. He thought sometimes that he had been forgiven for things he had not yet done, and this frightened him more than the White Walker tales. He and Robert met one last time in a place without banners. It was a small bridge over a small river that had a willow leaning as if listening. They had ridden fast, both of them, because dispatches had passed between them about nameless things moving in the far north again. Their men waited out of earshot. The willow dipped its hair into the current. Rhaegar looked as if he had been born in a saddle and had never left it. Robert looked like a man who had learned to rest his shoulders or be ground down by them. "Do you regret?" Rhaegar asked without greetings. "Yes," Robert said honestly, "but I do not regret what I chose at the mountain. I regret the things I broke before that. I regret I did not learn to listen sooner. I regret that I cannot eat as much as I once did without the cook Tutang. I regret that Lannister yet breathes. I regret roses," Rhaegar said, "and then I do not. I regret that I wanted the world to sing a song I wrote. I regret that I could not save my father from himself in a way Pat would have left him a man. I regret the way my children will be afraid for me because I love them." "And what will you do?" Robert asked with interest. "Keep building roads," Rhaegar said dryly. "Keep sending men north and south instead of east and west. Keep making law tedious. Keep listening when the wind changes." He looked at the water as if it held an inscription. "If we do this long enough, perhaps songs will be written about our dullness, and on those nights men will sleep." Robert laughed. The sound startled birds out of the willow. "I should like that," he said, "to frighten bards into yawning." They stood there a little while longer with their hands on the bridge's low parapet. 2 men who would have killed each other in another world and had not in this one and had learned, along the way, to be the kind of men who could admit it. They parted with less fuss than the moment deserved. They had more letters to read. The years that followed were not the good years men tell their sons about, but they were better than the ones that might have been. There were famines in corners and floods in others. There were men who loved and were not loved back and did not break anything. There were lords who tried to set fire to rooms and found the rooms had already been emptied of tinder. There were women who said no and were heard. There were skirmishes on borders that never became banners upon banners. There was a great misery at sea one spring that took 3 ships out of Gulltown, and a son of a fisher whose mother grieved him in a way that made gods look away in respect. There was a long, cold day at the wall when something moved beyond the trees and Benjen ordered the horn blown once, and then once again in a tone that made boys forget to breathe. And when the thing came out, it was only an elk that had frost on its muzzle and a humorless expression, and men laughed until they had to sit down. Robert grew grayer. Lyanna grew sharper and then softer again, like mountains do when they are the same mountains and the weather plays across them. Ned's hair went white at his temples in a manner that made Catelyn touch his head in passing, as if reminding herself the color was really there. Brandon's laugh deepened and then ended one summer when a horse broke its leg under him and came down on him wrong, and Catelyn went into her chamber and did not come out for 2 days, and when she did her eyes were red, and then she went and set about being alive with a steadiness that made Winterfell continue to be a place where bread was warm and men knew where to stand. Jon stood one day in the yard with snow falling. He watched the white make the black steps into white steps and thought that perhaps the thing he had been promised was not a place or a name but a kind of work. He thought of a tower in a mountain and a man with a sword who did not lift it, and of a woman who had made the world new by refusing an old song. He thought of a man with a hammer who had decided not to kill another man because a woman had asked him not to and because he had wanted to be more than his temper. He thought of a king who writhed slowly like a river and wore a crown only after he had become worth it. He thought, "It is a small thing to be good when the world is watching. It is a greater thing to be good when it is tedious." His breath plumed. A girl pelted him with snow from the side, and he tackled her into a drift, and she came up spluttering and laughing and called him a goat. Somewhere in the house a cup fell and did not break. Somewhere in the south a letter came with news of a harvest that had been better than expected and a birth that had been harder. Somewhere at sea a ship sailed the wrong way for a day and then corrected. Somewhere in Dorne, Elia Martell ate a fig and closed her eyes to savor it. Somewhere in Old Town a maester wrote a line and then another and then crossed them both out because the sentence did not deserve to live. At Storm's End, Robert stood before the small godswood that was not much of a godswood and laid his hand on the old oak again. He thought of the boy on the wall and the men around a fire and the woman with blue roses in her hair, and of the time on a mountain when he had held his sword back, and of the fact that his hand still wanted sometimes to lift it just to feel its weight. He thought of the way Lyanna sometimes touched the scar on his forehead where the cup had struck him and smiled like a person counting the ways a man can be a fool and still be hers. He thought of the sea. He thought of winter. He thought of bread. A storm rattled the shutters. He grinned into the wind and said aloud, because he liked the sound of his own voice in a storm to remind him that men make noise against weather, "We did not start a war," he added, because he had learned to speak truth even when it made the sound less pretty. "We started a world." The wind did not answer. It did not need to. Wind is the kind of thing that goes on doing its work whether men praise it or blame it. Robert turned back toward the hall where there was light and noise and the smell of meat and the sound of a woman. He loved speaking to a child in a tone that meant she had found the right word and just needed a man to go and fetch it from the pantry. He went.